Hello, everyone, wherever you are tuning in from. Thank you, Francis, Jason, Laurence, and Stefan for being here today. Our climate talk today is about new challenges in managing soil, and it is in partnership with the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation, an organization with whom we got connected via a cherished member of ours, Mimi Castillo. Its trustee, Stefan Cronk, is here with us today, and he will be hosting this discussion. Apologies to those who have tuned in before, but we have newcomers in our audience, and we would like to introduce ourselves to you. We are an international organization triggered by Taylor Sport. In the last 2 years, we have been building an open and collaborative network, a platform where companies share in a variety of ways climate solutions spread across the wine value chain. The purpose behind what we do is that we believe there is no competition, or there should be no competition when it comes to fighting global warming. We have no need to reinvent the wheel, but rather to share what we are doing and therefore save time and resources in fighting the climate crisis. Climate action is about survival as a species, not as a sector, and we'll only be able to respond to this crisis together. We are a growing community with members from different regions, sizes, spread across the wine value chain, but most importantly, at different stages of climate action. We welcome companies to join us, regardless of where you are in terms of climate path. We value and seek for progress action more than we do perfection. And this spirit of inclusiveness creates a wider space for learning and connection between members and to boost climate action. So consider this as an invitation to act and to join us. We would love to meet you, and we are a click away. And these climate talks of ours are a fundamental tool in the way we work, as they rely on collaborative sharing, having people from different regions, profiles, companies share their experiences, the best they have done and that they know how. Regenerative, which is a word we'll be talking about today, regenerative viticulture, we may say that is the buzzword of the moment. And so we felt the need of creating a channel, a space for this concept and for its steps to be clarified. So together with Stefan, and as usual, we're bringing different people to this table to help us do just that. So from the UK, we have Francis. Francis, thank you for being here. Francis is a consultant viticulturist at Vinescapes. From the US, we have Jason Haas, who's the partner and general manager at Tablas Creek. And from France, hello, Laurence, we bring you Laurence Berlemont, the founder of the Cabinet d'Agronomie Provencale. I hope I said it as best as I could. And as we mentioned before, we have Stefan Cronk, the co-founder of Maison Mirabeau, and founder trustee at the Regenerative Viticulture Foundation, hosting this conversation. So without further ado, Stefan, the stage is yours. Thank you for being here.
Great. Thank you very much for the lovely introduction, Marta. And thank you, Marta and Christina, for the great work you do with the Porto Protocol. I think it's phenomenal what you two are achieving. And I really admire your work. So even though I'm based in Provence, you probably tell from my accent that I'm not French, I'm Englishman. I basically decided to move from London to Provence 12 years ago, and I created a wine brand called Mirabeau. We were and still are a négociant initially, so we were working with growers from across the whole region, but it was always my dream to one day buy a vineyard, and 2 years ago, after looking for 5 years, we eventually found a beautiful wine estate that we bought in Côte de Provence, in fact, a new appellation, called Notre-Dame des Anges. So amazing terroir, and really was the fulfillment of a dream. I mean, since then, the first vintage, we got hit by once in a lifetime frosts. We had -7 degrees centigrade, and we lost 30% of our vintage. And this year, it just got a whole lot worse, because we got hit by frost again, and then we lost everything else to smoke, because we had forest fires all around, 7,000 hectares of forest, and what didn't burn has been hit by smoke taint. So the reality of wine farming isn't quite as romantic as I thought when I was living in London, but I wouldn't change a thing. It's been amazing. But when we bought the estate, it had been conventionally farmed for 20 plus years, really poor soil quality. I mean, it was as hard as my table. So every time the rains came, they just went straight off into the surrounding streams. In fact, the previous owner said that you need to get a caterpillar digger because one of the fields is on a slight slope, and every year you must collect the soil that's rushed to the bottom because of the rain and put it back at the top of the slope again. And it seemed to be so crazy that that this farm with such great potential was being, in my view, mismanaged. And even though we had already converted it to organic or started the conversion to organic when we bought it, we realized that just by being organic wasn't going to actually rebuild and repair the soils in the vineyard. And as I was going through these machinations, like, how do we do it differently? Because I don't want to do it. I don't want to just be organic. I want to go beyond that and really focus on soil and biodiversity. And then a friend of mine sent me an article written by a journalist who I'm sure most of you will know, Eric Asimov, writing for the New York Times. And it was about this lady called Mimi Castillo, who I'm sure many of you know, who is farming regeneratively in Oregon and have been doing so for more than a decade. And reading that article, and then I reached out to Mimi, and it just seemed to make so much sense. But one of the key things that Mimi was telling me was that, you know, you need support. You can't just stop plowing. You can't just throw away everything you've learned at wine school and just start doing regen. You need support, and you need to understand what you're doing and look what to look out for and so on. But because there was sort of, apart from a few farmers doing it here and there are more and more now, we decided with a friend of mine called Cameron, who lives in the village with me in France, we decided to set up a foundation with the catchy name Regenerative Viticulture Foundation, or the RVF for short, to bring together a community of practitioners, researchers, and leaders in regenerative farming to advance research and to scientifically prove and practically demonstrate the environmental and the economic benefits of farming in a regenerative way. We're looking to develop resources and programs to inform and support educators, because we think it's so important that wine schools start to talk about a different way of farming. We want to raise awareness of the benefits of working with biodiversity. So we're looking to run seminars and workshops and do talks rather like this, to create a kind of forum and support for people embarking on this journey. And when I sort of look back at, you know, the sort of history of the plough, which is more or less 6,000 years old, you know, it's only been in the last 100 years or so that we've gone, oh gosh, actually, maybe this isn't always such a good thing, you know, to be industrially farming. You know, when we saw the Dust Bowl of the 1930s and the impact of all that soil just blowing away across Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas, because the soils were so depleted, they just turned to dust. And, you know, so I read Gabe Brown's book, From Dirt to Soil, about, you know, we need to move away from focusing just on increasing yields and start thinking about long-term soil health, and how to really focus on making sure that the soil is looked after, and to wean ourselves off, you know, chemical herbicides and pesticides and nitrogen-based fertilizers and so on. And these are some of the pillars of regenerative farming. And I haven't even mentioned storing carbon in soils yet. You know, so there are a lot of reasons why I think we as wine farmers need to look at farming in a different way. And that's why it was an honor and a privilege to be invited to talk with this wonderful panel about regenerative farming, and obviously in particular on its impact on soil. And Jason, good morning to you in sunny California. I know you've been farming regeneratively at Tablas Creek for some time now. But you've also been farming organically and biodynamically as well. So, and I also understand you're the first to be certified regenerative with the ROC. So tell us a bit about, you know, the journey from kind of organic and biodynamic to regen, and what regen means to you as a wine farmer.
Sure. So for the people who are unfamiliar with Tablas Creek, we are a partnership co-founded by the Perrin family from Château de Beaucastel and Famille Perrin in the Rhone Valley. And they have been farming organically since the 1950s, out of a conviction that that was really the only way that they could express their terroir. And so that was our starting point. When we started in 1989, we wanted to do everything we could to express the character of the place that we had chosen. And we're in Paso Robles, California. We didn't know what the terroir expression was going to be, but we wanted to express it, whatever it was. And so farming organically was our starting point. And we realized little by little that it's not specifically organic that makes that difference. I mean, if you think of what organics is concerned with, it's basically concerned with the elimination of chemical applications in a farm environment. So you are required to get rid of chemicals, chemical herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers, and replace them with some non-chemical alternative. But in practical terms, it's that replacement. There's still a lot of things that are being added to your vineyard environment or your farm environment if you're farming organically. And our goal, starting in the late 2000s, was to try to eliminate all of the inputs that we could that had to come from off the farm. And so that led us little by little to biodynamics, where we were trying to create an ecosystem that was in balance. So instead of bringing in organic fertilizer, we were doing our own composting. We were growing our own cover crops. We eventually decided to bring in our own flock of sheep. We now have 200 sheep and a handful of alpacas that graze the vineyard every winter, turn the cover crops into manure, fertilize naturally. So it was that kind of process of eliminating outside inputs that brought us to biodynamics. We started farming a slice of the vineyard biodynamically in 2010, got our biodynamic certification in 2016. And it was through the work that we had done with Demeter and the Biodynamic Association that we got connected with the Regenerative Organic Alliance, who were interested in the soil health pieces that we were doing, as well as some of the kind of resource use reduction, dry farming, farm worker fairness, social fairness pieces that we had implemented already. And that's one of the things that I think, so I think you can think of regenerative organic, at least as it's defined by the Regenerative Organic Alliance in the United States, as kind of the soil health pieces of biodynamics, plus a commitment to the reduction in the use of non-renewable resources like energy and water, and then additional pillars on animal welfare and farm worker fairness, designed to together be kind of the gold standard for farming, but also to create as many positive externalities as you can with your farm unit. And that allows you to do things like capture carbon, increase your soil's water holding capacity, increase the microbial activity in your soil, and just make sure that the contributions that you're making, not just to your own little piece of land, but to your community and your larger region, are positive ones.
So what are the changes that you've noticed since you've been farming regeneratively?
So it's interesting. For us, the big changes that we noticed were more when we made the conversion from organic to biodynamic, because we feel like that took us kind of 95% of the way to what we're doing now with the regenerative organics. And we were thinking that the biggest impact on our kind of grape quality and wine quality was going to be that the additional soil fertility that we were building was going to allow the vines to be healthy longer, and we wouldn't have to replant at age 25 the way that a lot of our neighbors do, because the vines are just exhausted. This is a very high stress environment in Paso Robles. It is essentially entirely dry between May and October. We get all of our annual rainfall in 6 months. It can be quite hot. 105 to 110 Fahrenheit. Wow. is not unusual. We get a dozen or so of those days every summer, but the nights are also quite cold. So it's just a very high diurnal swing, high stress environment. And so our thought was, by insulating the vines from as much of this as possible, we would just allow them to thrive for longer. And our benefit would be that we wouldn't have to replant until the vines were, say, 50, instead of having to replant at 25 or 30. So it was a surprise to us that in that first year that we switched to farming a 20-acre slice of the vineyard biodynamically in 2010, that in the blind tastings that we do during our blending trials, the wines from those blocks floated to the top of the blind tastings. And we just sort of wrote it off as an interesting thing to note that first year. But the same thing happened the second year. And that convinced us that we needed to be expanding beyond that initial 20-acre slice. So we doubled that in 2012 and eventually got to farming the whole vineyard biodynamically in 2015. And I don't think it is a coincidence that we're on the best run of quality that we've ever seen, starting, I think, in 2016. And that's been across drought years, it's been across wet years, it's been across cool years and hot years. I think that the resilience that you build into your farm unit allows grapevines to focus on what they're doing and get the maximum amount of character into the fruit, and produce wines with more character and more balance. So the impact on us was more, I think, on the wine quality was more from the biodynamic side. The impact on our team and our unit, that we saw in the conversion to regenerative organic, because one of the tenets is that you are required not just to educate your farm workers on their rights and their responsibilities, but also include them in the decision making, solicit and act upon their feedback. And the level of additional investment and involvement and commitment from our vineyard crew, many of whom had been with us for decades, has been really amazing to see. Like, you watch them bring their kids out on weekends to visit the flock of sheep and show the work that they're doing. And I have to feel that translates into the work that they do on a daily basis.
That's a remarkable side effect that one doesn't think about, but I think it does. It brings the human back into the fields a lot more, which is what's needed, I think, when people have been stuck in their air-conditioned tractor cabs driving around. Two more questions quickly before I go on to Francis. One is a big question around whether you think that, since you've been farming regeneratively and biodynamically, whether you think that your vineyard is representing the terroir more strongly. Do you think you're getting that connection more through into the fruit?
I do. It's one of those things that would be essentially impossible to measure. Right. How can you tell? But when we're doing the blind tasting, which is the way that we start our blending trials every year, we're grading essentially for expressiveness. It's not just how powerful is this? How tannic is this? How ripe is this? It's how expressive is it? How well does it express the character of the grape? And we've gone from roughly a third of the lots getting our top grade, which is essentially makes it eligible for inclusion in our Esprit de Tablas, which is the top tier of the wines that we make, to, in recent years, roughly half of the lots getting our top grade, which, I mean, that feels to me like a measurable improvement. And I think it's only going to be more dramatic as you get to the point where otherwise we would have had to have pulled out and replanted grapevines. Because I do think that the soil health pieces is allowing these vines to stay healthy and productive longer in a difficult environment. So if you think of the difference between how expressive of terroir is a 40-year-old grapevine compared to the 5-year-old vine that you replanted because you needed to, I think the differences there are going to be even more dramatic. And
what about, I mean, what's interesting talking to you is you've been doing this for some time. What have you noticed with yields since you switched to regen?
I don't think we've noticed anything particularly significant about yields. It seems like, for us at least, the yields are a lot more determined by how much rain we get in the winter, and whether or not we get a frost in the spring, than they are by any of the things that we're doing in our farming. But one thing that we have noticed, and this is not directly a regenerative question, this is a dry farming question, because we've been planting all of our new blocks, wide spaced, head trained, dry farmed, which was not the way that we planted in the early years, where we were planting closer together to create more competition, but with irrigation. We've noticed that in our droughts, which seem to be becoming more frequent and more severe, the dry farm blocks perform better than the trellised irrigated blocks, which seems very counterintuitive. But you wouldn't think that the vines that you could irrigate would underperform the vines that you couldn't in a drought. But the difference is vine density and where the masses of the roots are. So when you have established a vineyard with irrigation, even when you're doing it the way that we are, which is trying to encourage deep root growth, irrigating only once or twice a summer, but deeply, still a higher percentage of the vine roots are near the surface than they would be if something were planted farther apart and dry farmed from the beginning. And so we've noticed that in a drought year, the vines that are planted closer together and are forced to compete with each other, even when we supplement with irrigation, may see yields down by 30 or 40%, whereas the dry farm blocks only see yields down maybe 10%. So that's not a directly regenerative piece, but it's a piece of sort of planting a vineyard in a way that it can live within its means, live within the resources that are provided to it on an annual basis naturally.
That's fascinating to hear your experiences in that area. And but I should move on to somebody in a very different climate, Francis. The concept of irrigation is probably something that's a bit alien to you with the work you're doing in the south of England, where probably the opposite is true. You have a bigger problem with rain than you do with drought. But tell me a little bit about your view on soil and whether we should treat it differently. I mean, I was talking to Laurence the other day about how wine schools 30, 40 years ago were basically saying that soil was just a medium in which you grow the vine and keep it vertical. Everything else we put in afterwards. But now the thinking is much more that we should treat soil as a living organism. Well, what are your views on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It is living. It's not just an organism. It's thousands of different organisms all working together in harmony and balance. And it's that balance that's really important, especially in viticulture. So we're looking at not just bacteria, we're looking at fungi, we're looking at arthropods, mammals, all those sorts of things that sort of interact with each other. They form part of a soil food web. So as soon as you sort of start to get one out of balance, you get some creeping up and sort of negative and detrimental sort of effects on the vine growth. So for us in the UK, we're sort of quite a new industry. It's been around sort of 40 years or so, but we're in a really a period of rapid growth at the moment. So we're planting sort of 3.2 million vines. We planted in 2019, which was the biggest year for us so far. And us as a company, we're planting sort of 200,000 vines a year, and we're relatively small. So we're looking at a period of rapid growth and a period where mistakes can be made at a rapid pace as well. So so for us, we're trying to sort of bring that focus back into the soil isn't just a physical entity; it's also it's a biological entity as well, and we're looking at sort of changing the way that we think about it. So for us as an establishment company, we're looking at the soil, we're looking at we get the soil analysis done, we'll look at the plant available nutrients, but we're also thinking long term about the biology and sort of inoculating the soil and being able to sort of phase out herbicide and pesticide use starting from the ground up.
And so, yeah. How do you start? I mean, when you see a block of land and you think, okay, we're gonna plant here, you obviously take samples of the soil, but then how do you know what to do to get it into a state that's more useful for vineyard growing?
Yeah, so we'll tend to look at the sort of historical land use as well. So whether it was pasture, farm, arable farm. So a lot of our sort of clients at the moment are mixed enterprise, taking previously arable land and converting that into viticulture. So we'll take that into account most of the time. So looking at what was grown on there before, whether it was pasture land. So for example, an arable farm or pasture land, you're looking at probably quite a high nitrogen level or high bacterial soil, or the balance is sort of a 1-to-1, whereas viticulture, we're looking for a more fungal soil and sort of trying to edge that up. And that could be adding compost, for example.
And what about cover crops? I mean, how do you know what the best kind of cover crops would be to plant in a particular area?
Yeah, that comes down to sort of experimentation and what you're trying to achieve with the cover crop. So we have a sort of a mix of soil types and soil structures across the UK. We go from sort of what we have down in the weald, so weald clay, but you also have sort of sandy loam over chalk and things like that, and limestone. So it really depends on what your soil type is as to what kind of cover crop and what your objective is. So for example, clay soil, you'd be looking to sort of minimize compaction throughout the growing season. We have very wet springs, we have wet autumns, and we have heavy machinery going on the field at that time. So you're looking for something that's going to help minimize that compaction.
It's interesting you mentioned that you use the word fungi. We talk about fungi. There's obviously a massive part of the life under the soil. In fact, I'm going to go to Laurence now and ask Laurence a question. I know that you have been working on a very interesting kind of microbial tea that's you call Liphophère. And I'm curious to understand, what is it? How do you make it? What does it mean? And how does it help in building fungi in the soil?
Yeah, so first I have to apologize for my poor English. If I'm not clear, please ask more details. Liphophère, we call Liphophère. It is the French word, but we call in English efficient microorganism. And the efficient microorganism, in fact, is coming from a way of cultivating. In previous time, it's a very ancestral practice in South America and also in Asia. The farmers who are cultivating until now vegetables are adding this kind of efficient microorganism, Liphophère. Liphophère is in fact based on the idea that the agricultural soil we are cultivating on are less and less rich and empty with nutriments, and because of herbicides and because of chemicals. And as Jason explained just a few minutes ago, we see that our vineyards are absolutely exhausted after 25 years. And it should stay for 35, 40 years. And it's not normal that the vines are so weak and with so missing vines after 25 or 30 years. So one of the idea was that the soil was too poor. And when you compare the agricultural soil and vineyards to the soil of a forest, we realize it's very obvious that the soil in a forest is very rich with fungi, and when the human being is not involved in a field as in a forest, which is wild, we can see that the soil is a lot more rich. So the idea is to take a part of this soil in the forest, which is fermenting. That's why we call Liphophère in French, which means litière forestière fermentée, which is the part, not the top, not the leaves, the dry leaves, not the soil itself, but the part in the forest in between, which is in the process of fermenting. We take a little bit of this material and we add some sugar and we add some milk and we add some nutriments in order to increase this volume. And this volume of products is full of fungi and the symbiotic union between fungi and all the material in it. And this material we can put in the water, for instance, that we began to try for 2 years, in order to water the new vines we are planting, in order to make the vines are using better the water compared with the classic watering with only water. So we have done for the 2 past years some experiments with 3 rows with Liphophère and water, 3 rows with only water, 3 rows with Liphophère, etc., to compare. And for the 2 last years, we saw a huge. We don't want to give the figures because the figures are too interesting, and we want to verify again. But we are, for the 2 past years, more than 30% more growth of the vines, which let us know that the vines are better installed and better the shape is better in the ground, which will permit the vines then to grow and then to last longer, we hope.
So how much watering are you talking about here? How many times did you pass those vines with watering?
In fact, I'm speaking about the watering for the 1 or 2 first years of the vines. And we water, it depends. In Provence, of course, it's quite dry. And normally we have to water 3, 4, 5 times during the first summer. And we are adding the lithophère at the rate of 6% of the water. And yeah.
Sorry, and you're saying that the difference between the wines where you had the lithophère and the vines which you just watered, the difference was 30% additional growth.
Yeah, we think that is due to the symbiotic union between the lithophère and the roots of the vines, which are able to use better the water. For the same amount of water, the water with lithophère is more efficient for the vines. And we had more than 30% growth better in the vines which were watered with lithophère, which is huge. You can see it, but just of course we measured the length of the branches, but only seeing the vineyard we saw it. It was quite obvious, and it's very funny because in fact we began that 2 years ago because one of my consultants, we are a company which are consultant for vines and vegetables. And in the vegetables, one of my consultants worked in South America, and he said over there for vegetables, it's obvious. It's not very well measured, but the farmers do lithophère and efficient microorganisms in the vegetable garden as something completely obvious. And we tried to see if such practices were done in the vines, and we didn't find too many experiments all over the world. So we decided to do it these 2 past years, and the results were so interesting that we had hired a PhD woman who will begin to make more strict experiments to be sure of ourselves.
So, I mean, it's fascinating, and I'm really pleased that you're kind of further investing in what's going on. But what do you think is going on with the microbes and the fungi? I mean, under the soil, can you sort of paint a picture of what's going on there and how it's helping?
At the moment, we are just seeing the results. It's almost impossible to know exactly what there is behind that result. We think that it's mycorrhiza. I don't know the translation in English. I think it's mycorrhiza. There is some mycorrhiza thanks to the fungi on the roots of the vines, which allow the roots to go farther and to permit the roots to be more efficient drinking the water, if I can say, drink the water for the roots. And we think, because that's what we saw in the salads, that the roots are, you have a bigger network of roots in the ground compared to a salad which is only watered with pure water.
And it's fascinating to me because when I joined the wine trade a gazillion years ago, many years ago, people always talked about the fact that for a vine to be truly expressive of the soil, it must go deep and get the minerals from 2 meters under the soil. So so if that's true, then why are we obsessive about the topsoil when actually it's going so deep and getting everything it needs from further down?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I understood.
Okay, well, actually, I'll address this maybe to Jason because
yes.
it's a concept that I'm sure you understand as well. That this sort of I mean, you're much younger than me, but I was told at wine school that actually a vine must suffer to produce great wine. So why are we obsessing about the topsoil?
So I think there's a couple of ways to think about that question. I know where we are, and I think this is generally true of where grapevines are grown around the world. Grapevines are suffering plenty. Like where we are in Paso Robles, I mean, the fact that it is entirely dry for 6 months of the year, and the fact that it can be so hot, we only have in some places 6 to 12 inches of topsoil anyway. So, I mean, the vines are in an incredibly stressful environment. So if we can reduce that stress from panic level to just high stress, I feel like there is an appropriate balance there. The other way that I think it's appropriate to answer that question is, if you think, and this is something that that's kind of built off of a talk that I heard John Williams give. If you know him, he's the founder, owner, winemaker at Frog's Leap up in Napa Valley, and was one of the pioneers of organic and biodynamic farming, grape growing in California. He said that a lot of what kind of modern industrial farming does is it severs the vine's connection to its natural environment. So if you are using herbicides and killing the things in your soil, and you're using pesticides and killing the insects, and you're fertilizing with a specific dose, a specific formula of fertilizer, you've cut a lot of the vine's ability to make sense of its natural environment. And so restoring the life that's in the soil helps the vine regulate itself in a better way. It helps it understand as the seasons are changing. It helps it react to stresses like a drought, or like some sort of invasive pest. It helps it make the reactions that it would do in a more normal environment. And so I love what Laurence was talking about with the mycorrhizomes in the soil. This is a part of the symbiotic relationship between a grapevine and the soil, which, as you said earlier, is not just a collection of like rock particles that hold the roots in place. There's what, billions of organisms in a teaspoon of healthy soil. And we know so little about how so many of those things interact that it seems incredibly presumptuous to think that we can just replace all of the interactions by a handful of inputs that we might be putting onto the vine from above. So what you're doing is not just impacting the topsoil, it's impacting the vine's ability to make sense out of its environment. And that's true whether the things that you're doing are an addition that may happen a few times a year, or whether it's something which is more holistic in terms of building up an ecosystem that's going to have these combinations of fungi and microorganisms in the soil naturally, because the soils themselves are natural products of their environment.
And what is the part that carbon plays in the soil then, and how does drawing down more carbon from ultimately from the air and in the soil, how does that help with the whole symbiosis of what's going on there?
I think there's probably lots of ways that it helps, but I know one of the most dramatic ways is that, and this was something that the Regenerative Organic Alliance published a few weeks ago, that every 1% additional organic matter that you can put into your soil allows it to retain 20,000 gallons of water a year, more than it could without that 1%. So if you think of your soil's water holding capacity as something which is somehow like constant and finite, that's wrong. Pulling that carbon out of the atmosphere is good for the atmosphere, but it's also increasing the organic matter in your soil is good for its water holding capacity. And I'm sure for all of the other, or many of the other sorts of symbiotic relationships that rely on soil fertility.
Yeah, it's fascinating, that world. When I think about these crazy billionaires trying to go onto Mars or the moon, and they see the stars up there, and they can imagine the universe. But I think there's an equally large and vivid universe in the soil, but because you can't see it, we can't picture it and imagine really what's going on there. And so actually, Francis, on the subject of carbon, I spoke to Alistair, your colleague, about biochar. Have you had experience with actually putting carbon physically into the soil and seeing differences that it can make?
No, not yet, but it's definitely something that we're sort of researching and looking into, because it's very it's uncharted territory here in a sense. So I think for us to be able to incorporate that in viticulture would be amazing.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, Francis. Jason, have you got some experience with that?
Yeah, we've been applying biochar for about 4 years at this point. And for the last 2 years, producing our own on site, using the prunings we take off of the vineyard and fallen trees and things out of our forests. And it's been amazing. We have, if you look on our social media, we have some pictures of some of the experimental blocks we've done where we've applied biochar to half of a block and have not to the other. And you look, the cover crops are like 30% deeper and taller in the biochar applied blocks. And it's, for the people who might not know what biochar is, it's essentially just natural charcoal. Charcoal is the result of incomplete combustion of various sorts of woody materials, and it's one of the ways that, at least in an area like California, where wildfires are a normal part of the environment, it's one of the ways where soil fertility is built over time, where you have a forest fire that will come roaring through a forested area, and some of the trees burn. A lot of the others kind of fall over, or limbs will fall down and smother the fire and lead to this charcoal creation. And that gradually gets incorporated into the soil. And charcoal is a very stable form of carbon. It's one of the reasons that archaeologists can use it to date things that are thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years old. And so anytime that you have this charcoal that gets added to your soil, that's carbon that's not going to be re-released into the atmosphere as a part of a normal decay cycle. And so it's a great way of reducing the amount of carbon that you're putting back into the environment, say in a burn pile or just through normal decay processes. But also its crystalline structure allows soil to hold a lot more water because of the way that, if you look at it, it looks like Superman's cave with all of the crystal structures. And so I can only, again, I don't think we know exactly why it works the way that it does, but it seems to have some very dramatic positive impacts in terms of aerating the soil, allowing it to hold more water, reducing soil compaction, and then reducing the re-release of that carbon that the plants have pulled out of the atmosphere from going back into the atmosphere.
And you how do you actually get it into the soil?
So what we've been doing is we've been mixing it with our compost. So we've basically been mixing it into the compost, typically then activating it by putting it in a relatively small area with our whole flock of sheep. So it'll be a mix of compost and biochar and manure, and then just putting it into our compost spreader and spreading it on the surface of the vines, surface of the soil, under the vines, typically before the fall rains start to come.
Right, I was going to say, yeah. So the rains can help wash it in as well. Laurence, got a question for you about introducing, because there's this whole concept of regenerative farming is an anathema here in the south of France. The idea of introducing concurrence, introducing competition in the vineyard where water is scarce, is something that I know my neighbors think it's crazy. How do we change the way people think about cover crops and moving away from a monoculture mindset and actually having biodiversity in the vineyard?
Yeah, very often people think that if you put some grass in between the rows of vines, you will have competition for the water, which is people are very stressed about that in Provence. And also some people say if you don't plow, it will compact, the soil will compact itself, and it's not good. And the 2 point when you do a cover crop, when you have grass in between the rows, you realize that the 2 points are wrong. First, the concurrence for the water is very well balanced with the non-evaporation of the water, because when you have very dry summer and very dry season, in fact, the soil, when it is nude, will evaporate its water a lot, and the grass, which is drying, in fact, is used as like a hat on the soil, which protects against evaporation. So in fact, the competition is there is no competition with the grass, which is in fact taking a bit of water only on the first centimeters of the soil. And also for the compaction, people times to times are saying that if you don't plow enough, little by little the soil will compact itself. And also that's wrong also, because the roots of the grass and the things we are putting in between the rows are creating little holes, in fact, with the roots of the grass. And also, as you have grass, you permit the worms and all the little animals to grow properly in the soil, and then these worms will plow for instead of the plowing machine, in fact, and the compaction is not existing because of the life you put in the soil. We say in French, cercle vertueux. You can translate that in English. The grass permits the worms, and the worms is plowing naturally the ground.
It sounds like an amazing way to create the same impact of what we used to think ploughing was doing, which was aerating the soil, as we say. But in fact, the very beast that's dragging the plough is compacting in the first place. But actually, what ploughing is doing is destroying a lot more.
It's destroying the soil, and also it's making a mess in the environment of the worms. If you plow, all the worms and the little animals and which have their ecosystem around them is destroyed, and they have to rebuild at each plowing all the life in the ground as to recover a new balance, and we lose this ecosystem.
Yeah, again, it makes such sense that you've got these networks of root systems and wormholes and everything else that's actually aerating the soil and creating space for the water as well as everything else.
Yeah.
Francis, when we're talking about cover crops, obviously it depends where you are and what you plant and so on, but how do we manage the cover crops at the surface level? Do we just grow them and let them grow and die and have their own life cycle, or do we have to cut or break the crops? How do you manage that in the UK?
So typically we will sort of cut back the cover crop so it's not too high. We suffer with quite a high disease pressure and humidity, so we don't really want to be growing sort of long grasses and long things up into the canopy, but also we want to make sure that we're able to sort of pass machinery and people are able to sort of get in there and work, whether that's hand leaf stripping or anything like that. So yeah, we tend to sort of keep it relatively short, and it really depends on the time of year as well that you're thinking of. So during the growing season, sort of having shorter cover crop, but allowing that to sort of grow up through the winter.
And I'm curious to see, because I thinking about, well, we do have cover crops in our vineyard, and actually got a question for Jason again about managing sheep and alpacas in a vineyard. How does that work? I mean, do you let them roam around the whole place, or you try and have them in little parcels and you rotate them using electric fences? How does it work?
So the latter, we can only have them in the vineyard when the vines are dormant, or at least after harvest. So we'll generally get them back out in the vineyard in October, and then have a rotational grazing plan where we keep them in a pretty compact area of like 1.5 acres. So for the Europeans, it's like whatever, 2/3 of a hectare. And then we'll move them every 24 hours to another parcel. So we get them through the entire vineyard, usually 3 times each winter. And that encourages them to graze evenly, but also not to overgraze anything, because we're moving them out. And then it allows the grass to regrow. And then in the summer, when they can't be in the vineyard because they will happily eat the vines and the grapes, then we move them into our unplanted areas and our forest land. And that's helped us regenerate our forests, because in California, historically, hundreds of years ago, there would have been big herds of elk that would have been roaming through the forests, keeping the undergrowth down. And instead now, with ranches and fences and hunting, you have smaller grazing animals like deer that don't do the same job. And so you have a lot of buildup of this bushy undergrowth, which is one of the things that's made the forest fires here so deadly. And so having that flock of sheep out in the forests in the summer times when they can't be in the vineyard, it helps those forests stay healthier, back to a more natural environment, but it also reduces our fire risk.
And so have you had to employ a shepherd, or have you managed to train?
We do. We hired a shepherd like 6 years ago when we realized that this was not just a side project for our vineyard manager. This was something that needed planning. And we hired him, and he was an interesting guy. He was a trained vineyard guy in other ways. He's also he was a terrific photographer and videographer. He did a lot of media work for us. And we asked him what he wanted on his business card, and he's like, shepherd. So like we have a business card, like Tablas Creek, Nathan Stewart, shepherd. Like it's so yeah, we have a full-time shepherd, though he does other things.
And so back to how he manages the rotation of the sheep throughout the winter months. So does he have an electric fence that he drags all the way down the line of vines? And I mean, that sounds to me like quite hard work to do that every 24 hours.
It's a lot of work. Yeah, I mean, it's every 24 hours. Occasionally, when we get later in the season and the cover crops are higher, it might be every 48 hours. But it's still regular. And what we have is multiple movable kind of roll-upable electric fences that get hooked to a solar-powered battery, and we'll basically set up a fence next to the one the enclosure that they're currently in, then turn that new fence on, take the fence that's in the middle down, move them all through, and then put the fence back up, and then set the next one up on the other side. So it's basically just a planned progression through all of the different vineyard blocks over the course of 7 months.
Wow. Okay. And what have your neighbors thought of your this way of farming? Are you an early adopter, or are you a late adopter? Is this something that's now common practice, having beasts in your vineyard?
We were early adopters, but we weren't the only ones. There's an industry here of people who have large flocks of sheep who will be hired to bring in after crops are harvested to eat alfalfa is a big grain crop here. So often they'll harvest the alfalfa and then they'll bring sheep in to graze on whatever's left, the stubble, and get their fertility from the manure back in the soil. They might be there for a week, and then they're pulled out of there and moved to another place. So we were unusual in that we actually had our own flock, but it's fairly common in mixed agriculture here in California to have sheep come in after a harvest and do some cleanup work. And they've even started using herds of goats to clean like freeway areas in cities in California, because they're trying to keep the growth down to make it less likely that a spark from a car on the freeway starts a fire. So it's not unusual to drive on the freeways here and see herds grazing on the verges.
Yeah, I can imagine goat management must be a whole new level of skill required. But it's fascinating, this world that I'm just starting off in. But as in a new way of viewing farming. But it's interesting, where we are here in Provence, and Laurence, who I know very well, is also faced with a mindset that goes back generations, which is that anything in the vineyard that is not a vine is somehow in competition. And even the word here for weed is mauvaise herbe. It's a bad plant. So it's, for me, it's frustrating that, because a lot of the vineyards that I work with, and I work with about 20 different producers around the region, growers from around the region, and they would never dream of, they're embarrassed when they have mauvaise herbe growing in the vines. Laurence, what are we going to do to how do we change the way people view farming vineyards here in the south of France?
Yeah, in fact, I'm a consultant for 25 years, and 25 years ago, when you had 1 or 2 weeds in the vines, we were saying it's dirty, c'est sale, it's very dirty because of these weeds. And little by little, the eye is changing of people, I must admit. And thanks, I think, to the puppies, coquelicot puppies, because people love puppies. So when they see puppies in the vines, that's okay. They accept puppies because puppies, it's for them smart, it's pretty for the eye. So
by the way, Laurence, I just say, just in case, sorry, just in case people are wondering, we say poppy, and it sounds like when you say puppy, it's a baby dog.
Sorry.
You mean a poppy, the red flower, yeah.
Red flowers, exactly. So we can, thanks to, because as it's pretty, we can begin to explain to people, okay, poppy are pretty, but it's not only pretty. It's also some flowers which are improving the soil, and little by little it's coming. And also you have red, le trèfle rouge, red. I don't know the word. You have some flowers, other flowers which are very pretty, which permits to explain people. But I must admit that now, little by little, people accept. If it's regular, if it's not too high, if it's not too big, people accept that it's not completely empty without any weeds.
That's apparently it's red clover. Apparently, is the
clover. Sorry, yes, exactly, yeah. Red clover. Yeah.
It's funny. One of our trustees, and we have in the foundation we have 8 amazing trustees, and including Mimi and Cameron, who I know is on the call. But we also have a guy in Australia, Richard Leask, who's in McLaren Vale, just outside Adelaide, and he's been farming regeneratively and having cover crops all year round for many years. And he's actually had people stop at his farm and ask him, how's business going? Because I see you're not plowing anymore. Thinking he's running out of money, that he can't afford to plow. So it's, and actually I know somebody else in Bandol, who I think Laurence, who inherited this very small vineyard from his father, and had a very traumatic time explaining to his father that he wanted to let the grasses grow in between the vines, and he was actually the appellation apparently threatened to withdraw his AOP certificate because he wasn't clean. The vines weren't clean. Yeah. So I think we've got a long way to go to change the mindset here. But it's great the work that you're doing, that I think everybody on this call is doing with regards to proving there is. I think that the ecological benefits they sound obvious. But to proving that you can actually make better wine and for it commercially to make sense, you're reducing inputs, you have a different way of looking at your vineyard. And so, I think what Jason was saying about the wine quality is getting better as a result of, farming in this way is testament to the fact that we must take this, regen farming far more seriously. But we've only got a few minutes left, and if you have one closing comment that you would like to make, I'll start with you, Jason. But what would you like to say?
I think what I would like to say is just that if there are producers who are watching and this is something that you're potentially interested in, one of the things that I've been incredibly heartwarming and encouraging about this is that everyone who is involved in this movement realizes that if we want to have an impact on the greater environment and the greater community, that's only possible to the extent to which it's widely adopted. So, we are always happy to have people come out and see what we're doing, to answer questions, take them on tours, share resources, and that feels equally true with everyone who I talk to who's involved in the regenerative farming movement. So, if it feels daunting, don't feel like you need to do everything all at once. You can do this in stages. You can move from farming in a purely modern chemical way to farming organically. You can move from organic to biodynamic. You can move from biodynamic to regenerative. You can incorporate regenerative things, even if you aren't yet ready to make the leap to farm fully organically. So there are great resources out there. Domestically, the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which is at regenorganic.org, is a great place to start. But if I can help in any way, we would be thrilled to.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And I'd love to get your help on with the foundation as well, because I think that sharing ideas and just giving confidence to people that, you can start on this journey, and it's a philosophy, it's a mindset. It's not necessarily a completely firm set of rules, and every vineyard's different, right? So it's what applies to one may be different to another. So thank you. Frances, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think, for us as an industry in the UK, because we're so young in the sense, and we're trying to find our feet still, I think it's very, very easy just to sort of pop your head over the fence and look at what your neighbour's doing, and just sort of copy that without really putting much thought into it. And I think for us, it can be quite scary to take a step outside the box and to do something different and to think differently. And I think that would be my main takeaway, is to sort of to monitor what you're doing and track those changes over time, and share that information with people in your industry and in your community, and really sort of spread the word. And don't be afraid necessarily to sort of fail, quote unquote fail. If you're sort of moving forward and trying new things, I don't really count that as a failure. You just know what not to do now.
Yeah, and that's something that certainly, I mean, Mimi has always said that to me, you have to hone in your observational skills, and take note of what's going on, and that's certainly something that requires attention. But I think it's a relatively straightforward thing to start doing.
Definitely.
You don't have to go and buy a huge piece of expensive equipment to do that. You can open your eyes and start to observe.
No, and that's definitely one of the first. So when we partner Vineyard, that's one of the first things that we sort of help our clients with, is to identify the risk, to identify different diseases and intervention levels, and really sort of target your inputs so that you're not sort of blanket treating everything. And it's a real, I think, once you sort of get people's minds around the fact that they need to monitor and they need to be quite detail oriented, and if you can get them to do that from the beginning, then you're really setting yourself up well for the future.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thank you for that. So Laurence, what are your passing thoughts?
I think with my experience, I would say that we have to be very aware of very old practices and methods, ancestral methods and practices, because, when I began 25 years ago, we were advising people to become organic. And organic was, we were very stressed about that. And a lot of people say, no, organic will never work. And we gave new methods. We were thinking it was new methods to people, and very old farmers were answering, but it's not new method. It's the way my grandfather was working, or my grandfather was working. And in fact, we reinvent 25 years ago how to be organic, but it was not new. It was the way the people were working for centuries.
Yeah. And
that was for organic 25 years ago. And now for the life in the soil, I have the same comment. The efficient microorganisms are used by farmers all over the world for years and decades and centuries. And I think that we have to be very aware of all these methods, because I do think that the methods are existing, in fact, and we just have to rediscover these methods that disappeared, in fact, for not so long, perhaps for 50 or 80 years, in fact.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And in fact, I think we've been relying too much on technology and too much on going down to the local wholesaler and saying, what can I buy this year that's going to make increase my yields, and actually getting closer to nature, which has got to be a good thing all around. Look, thank you all very much for your time today. Marta hopefully will come back on in a second and close off. But from my perspective, it's been I love talking about this, and I think even though vineyards only represent more or less than 1% of total agriculture in the world, we have this great chance to over-index on conversation. People care about terroir, they care about provenance. We don't have this kind of, I don't know whether there are people talking about potato chips or avocados in the same way we're talking about wine. And so I think it's so important that we're all keeping these conversations going. And no, thank you all for your time. And Marta and Porto Protocol, thank you very much for inviting us onto the call today.
Thank you. I think it was a wonderful partnership. We have decided in advance that we will be repeating this experience. So we'll be announcing a new date soon with other guests. It was wonderful. I think what you just said, that being close to nature is what we're talking about here. And indeed, the wine industry is in an amazing position to speak directly to the consumer. So we should take that opportunity. And it was wonderful listening to all of you. We must say, from where we stand, as you know, we are an international organization based in Portugal, listening to you saying that the vineyards have to be clean, there can be nothing, there can be no competition, is something that we listen to every day. So we can see how this is a common problem, no matter where you are in the world. Some of the things we hear, we are actually more similar than we think, regardless of where we are in the world. So we'll be coming back with a completely different topic in 3 weeks' time. We'll be talking about operations and logistics from climate action meeting operations and logistics. We'll have Nicholas Keeler from Crimson Wine Group. We'll have Richard Lloyd from Accolade Wine in the UK, and a third guest to be confirmed. So we hope to count on you then. And we hope you love this talk as much as we do. Thank you and bye.